The Nevada desert is a relentless furnace, where heat ripples off the cracked asphalt of a lonely, dust-choked gas station. Sloan, a billionaire CEO, is stranded after her luxury helicopter suffers a catastrophic engine failure mid-flight. Fuming over her missed meeting, she mocks Jax, a grease-stained mechanic walking with his young daughter. She tosses a check into the sand, laughing before her guards. "Listen, grease monkey, if you fix this $1,000,000 engine, I will kiss you right here in this godforsaken dust." Jax quietly hands his water bottle to his daughter and approaches the aircraft with rusted tools, but eyes as sharp as a razor. Sloan has no idea she just insulted the chief engineer who designed that very engine before he vanished from the world. Before we see how Jax makes Sloan regret her arrogant challenge, let me know which country you are watching from. Your presence is our honor. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support these silent heroes. The Nevada desert was a world of gold and bone, a place where the wind carried the taste of ancient dust and the sun punished anything that dared to move. In the middle of this vast emptiness sat a lonely, weathered gas station, its metal signs groaning in the heat. To most, this was a graveyard for dreams, but for Jax, it was a fortress. He was a man who lived in the quiet intervals of life, his days spent coaxing old engines back to life, and his evenings spent reading stories to his 7-year-old daughter, Ava. Jax was a mountain of a man, his skin bronzed by the sun, and his hands permanently stained with the honest grease of machinery. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, a stark contrast to the chaotic world he had left behind. Years ago, he had been the golden boy of aerospace engineering, a prodigy whose designs powered the most advanced military aircraft in the skies. But when his innovations were turned into instruments of a war he never agreed to, and after the tragic loss of his wife, Jax chose to disappear. He didn't just quit, he erased himself, seeking the anonymity of the sand to ensure Ava grew up away from the shadows of his former life. The silence of the desert was shattered by a mechanical scream. High above, a sleek, white helicopter, a machine that looked like a polished pearl against the blue sky, shuddered and began a frantic descent. With a plume of dust that coated everything in grit, the aircraft touched down near the rusted pumps of Jax's station. The door hissed open, and Sloan stepped out. She was the embodiment of city power, dressed in a sharp, slate-gray suit that cost more than Jax's entire shop. She was on the phone, her voice a sharp staccato of frustration. Behind her, 3 security guards in black tactical gear fanned out, their eyes scanning the horizon with practiced suspicion. "I don't care about the logistics," Sloan barked into her headset. "I have a merger meeting in 2 hours. If I am not in that boardroom, the entire aerospace division collapses." She disconnected and looked around the desolate station with a look of pure loathing. Her eyes landed on Jax, who was calmly adjusting a sun hat on Ava's head. He didn't look like a savior. He looked like a relic of a forgotten era, standing next to a toolbox that had seen better decades. "You," Sloan said, marching toward him, her heels sinking into the soft sand. "Do you have a satellite phone? My pilot says the onboard computer is locked, and the turbine has a thermal fracture. We need a recovery team from Vegas immediately." "Phones are down. Solar flare," Jax replied, his voice a deep, steady rumble that seemed to come from the earth itself. He didn't look at her. He looked at the smoke curling from the helicopter's exhaust. "And a recovery team won't get here for 5 hours. By then, the heat will have warped your rotor housing beyond repair." Sloan let out a sharp, mocking laugh. She looked at her guards, who were already chuckling at the sight of the grease-stained mechanic. She pulled a checkbook from her leather bag, ripped out a blank page, and tossed it into the dust at Jax's feet. "Listen to me, grease monkey," she said, her voice dripping with the arrogance of someone who believed every soul had a price. "I know your type. You're a failure biding your time in this wasteland. You probably don't even know how to prime a lawnmower, let alone touch a $1,000,000 turbine." She stepped closer, her perfume clashing with the scent of diesel and sagebrush. A cruel, playful glint entered her eyes. "Tell you what, if you can actually fix that engine, if you can get me to the city in time for my signature, I won't just pay you. I will kiss you, right here in front of everyone." A little souvenir from a world you'll never belong to. The guards erupted in laughter. Ava gripped Jax's hand, her small face turning red at the lady's mean words. Jax looked down at the check in the sand, then up at the helicopter. He didn't care about the money, and he certainly didn't care for the kiss of a woman who saw him as dirt. But he looked at the engine, a Mark 7 turbine. His engine. The one he had sketched on a napkin 10 years ago. It was being insulted by the very person it was trying to carry. Jax reached down, picked up his rusted wrench, and handed his water bottle to Ava. "Stay in the shade, honey," he whispered. He turned to Sloane, his eyes suddenly cold and sharp as a surgical blade. "Keep your check," Jax said, "but keep your word. Because in 10 minutes, you're going to realize that the only thing failing in this desert isn't my shop. It's your pride." The desert sun hung like a molten coin in the sky, casting long, jagged shadows across the sand. Jax did not hurry. He moved with the practiced stillness of a man who understood that machinery was not just metal and wires, but a language of heat and pressure. He stepped toward the white helicopter, his heavy boots crunching on the parched earth. Sloane watched him, her arms crossed tightly over her designer suit, her face a mask of skeptical disdain. Her guards stood by, their hands resting on their belts, waiting for the inevitable moment the local would admit defeat. Jax reached the engine housing and paused. He didn't look at the digital diagnostic screen that the pilot was frantically tapping. He simply laid his bare, calloused hand on the titanium skin of the turbine. He was listening. He was feeling the resonance of the cooling metal, the faint, irregular clicks of a thermal sensor that had gone rogue. "Hey! Don't touch that without gloves!" the pilot shouted, leaning out of the cockpit. "The housing is at 200 degrees. You'll burn your skin off." Jax didn't flinch. He knew this engine better than he knew the lines on his own palm. "The thermal fracture isn't in the housing," Jax said, his voice flat and calm. "It is a software loop in the cooling bypass. Your city technicians think they can fix everything with a laptop, but they forgot to account for the silica density in a Nevada sandstorm. The sensor is blinded, and the computer is suffocating the fuel line to prevent a fire that doesn't exist." He reached into his rusted, dented toolbox and pulled out a single, thin copper wire and a pair of pliers that had seen 40 years of service. Sloane stepped closer, a mocking smile playing on her lips. "A copper wire? You're going to fix a $1 million aerospace marvel with a piece of scrap? Just admit you're out of your depth, Jax. I'll double the check if you just get out of the way." Jax ignored her. He climbed onto the maintenance platform, his movements surgical. With one swift motion, he bypassed the primary digital lock, a security protocol that he himself had encrypted into the system a decade ago. He reached deep into the heart of the machine, his fingers moving through the scorching heat with a terrifying precision. He snipped a single redundant wire and bridged it with his copper scrap, creating a manual override that bypassed the blinded sensor. "What are you doing?" the pilot yelled, his face turning pale. "You just killed the warranty. If you jump that circuit, the whole thing could—" "Start," Jax interrupted. He stepped down from the platform, wiped a smear of dark oil from his forehead with the back of his hand, and looked at the pilot. "Hit the ignition. Now." The pilot hesitated, looking at Sloane. She shrugged, her eyes narrowed in a mix of curiosity and irritation. "Do it," she commanded. "Let's get this over with." The pilot turned the key. For a heartbeat, there was only the sound of the desert wind. Then, a low, guttural whine began to rise from the belly of the aircraft. It wasn't the jagged, coughing sound from before. It was a smooth, predatory purr that rapidly escalated into a powerful roar. The rotors began to spin, cutting through the thick desert air with a rhythmic thrum that shook the very ground they stood on. The engine was singing, a perfect, harmonious vibration that signaled a full recovery of power. The guards stepped back, their mouths agape. The pilot stared at his instruments in disbelief. "I don't understand. The pressure is stabilized. The bypass is holding. It's better than it was when we took off from Vegas." Jax stood his ground, the wind from the rotors whipping his hair and coat around him. He didn't look at the pilot. He didn't look at the guards. He turned his gaze directly toward Sloane. She was frozen. The arrogance that had defined her just 10 minutes ago had vanished, replaced by a stunned, breathless realization. She looked at the vibrating machine, then at the man standing before her, a man who had just dismantled and rebuilt the pinnacle of modern technology with a piece of wire and a wrench. He wasn't a grease monkey. He was a titan hiding in the dust. Jax walked slowly toward her, stopping just inches away. The roar of the engine was deafening, making the world feel small and intense. He reached out and gently plucked the blank check from the sand where it had been forgotten. He didn't look at it. He simply tore it into 4 pieces and let the wind carry them away into the sagebrush. "The aircraft is ready, Ms. CEO," Jax said, his voice easily cutting through the thunder of the rotors. He leaned in, his shadow falling over her, his presence suddenly overwhelming. "You have a merger to get to. But before you go, the desert has a long memory. You made a promise in front of your men and my daughter. I believe it's time you fulfill the contract." Sloane felt her heart hammer against her ribs. She looked into Jax's eyes and saw not the reflection of a failed mechanic, but the piercing intelligence of the ghost of technology her company had been hunting for half a decade. The roar of the rotors created a private world of thunder and wind, isolating Jax and Sloane in a circle of swirling dust. The guards remained frozen, their hands hovering near their sides, unsure of how to protect a woman who had walked herself into a trap of her own making. Sloane looked at Jax, her breath hitching in her throat. Up close, he didn't smell like failure or the stagnant dust of the Nevada plains. He smelled of ozone, old iron, and a raw, masculine power that made her skyscrapers in the city feel like toys. She had meant the challenge as a joke, a way to sharpen her teeth on someone she deemed inferior. But as she looked into his eyes that held the cold, mathematical depth of a genius, she realized the joke was on her. Sloane took a shaky step forward, her fingers trembling as they reached out to touch the rough, oil-stained fabric of his shirt. Then, she leaned in. The kiss was not the brief, mocking brush of lips she had planned. The moment their skin met, the desert seemed to go silent, despite the screaming engine. It was an explosion of friction and heat, a collision between the cold steel of the corporate world and the burning fire of the desert. Sloane felt a jolt of electricity that traveled from the soles of her feet to her heart. Jax didn't move to pull her closer, but his presence was a wall of heat, an immovable force that demanded she feel every second of her own surrender. When she finally pulled away, her face was flushed, and her eyes were wide with a confusion she couldn't hide. For the first time in her life, Sloane was speechless. She looked at Jax, searching for a smirk, a sign of triumph, but he remained as steady as the mountains behind him. He simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement that the debt was paid. "Ava, let's go," Jax said, turning toward his daughter. "The lady has a city to conquer." But as Jax turned, the pilot scrambled out of the cockpit, clutching a digital tablet. "Wait! Ms. Sloane, look at this." When he bypassed the thermal sensor, the system pinged a legacy encryption key. "I've never seen anything like it." Sloane snatched the tablet, her eyes scanning the lines of glowing green code. She was the head of the largest aerospace firm in the country. She knew the fingerprints of every major engineer in the world. Her breath caught. The Ghost Key, an encryption sequence so complex and elegant that it was considered a myth in the industry. It was the signature of the man who had vanished 5 years ago, the man whose absence had cost her company billions in failed projects. She looked from the tablet to the man walking toward the rusted gas station. "Jax!" she shouted, her voice desperate. "Wait!" Jax stopped, but he didn't turn around. Sloane ran across the sand, her heels forgotten, her expensive suit covered in grit. She caught up to him, grabbing his arm. "That bypass, that was a Mark 7 override. Only one person could have written that code. Only one person would know how to jump that circuit without blowing the fuel rail." She looked at him, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. You aren't a mechanic. You are Jackson Thorne, the chief engineer of the Thorne Vance project. My father spent 5 years and millions of dollars trying to find you after the military contract went south. You're the man who designed the very wings I fly on. Jax finally turned, and the mask of the simple mechanic fell away. His gaze was icy, filled with the weight of a history he had tried to bury. That man died 5 years ago, Sloan. He died when he realized his wings were being used to drop fire on people who couldn't fly. I'm just a father now. I fix cars and I keep my daughter safe from people like you. We are falling apart, Jax, Sloan pleaded, her corporate mask completely shattered. The new engine project is failing. The board is ready to sell the company to a foreign conglomerate that will strip it for parts. Thousands of families will lose everything. I didn't know you were here. I was exactly where I wanted to be, Jack said, looking at Ava, who was watching them with curious eyes. The engine is holding for now, Sloan said, glancing back at the helicopter. But it won't last the flight across the mountains. The bypass is manual. It needs a constant hand to monitor the pressure. If you don't come with us, we'll go down over the Sierra Peaks. And if I don't make this meeting with the board, the project is over. Your legacy becomes a graveyard. Jax looked at the horizon, the sun beginning to dip low. He saw the danger in her eyes, but he also saw something else. A spark of the girl he had once known, years ago, before she became a queen of glass and ice. He looked at Ava. He had tried to protect her by hiding, but he realized now that the world was coming for them anyway. If the company fell, the vultures would come to the desert to find what was left. Fine, Jack said, his voice hard as iron. We fly. But not for you, and not for your money. I'm doing this because that engine deserves to reach its destination, and because Ava has never seen the city lights. Sloan felt a surge of relief so strong it made her knees weak. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet, Jax warned as he walked back to the helicopter, his heavy boots echoing the rhythm of a war he was re-entering. You wanted a miracle, Sloan. But miracles in the desert always come with a price. You brought me back to the world. Now you have to deal with what I've become. As the group climbed into the luxury cabin, the contrast was jarring. Jax sat on the cream leather seats, his grease-stained clothes a dark bruise on the pristine interior. Ava sat by the window, her eyes wide as the machine lifted into the air. Sloan sat across from him, her gaze never leaving his face. She had her engineer, her Bong Ma Kongye, but as they soared toward the towering glass spires of the city, she realized the man she had kissed wasn't a subordinate she could control. He was a force of nature she had unleashed, and the city would never be the same. The bitter truth was settling in. Sloan had won the challenge, but in doing so, she had realized how truly small her world was. She had found the man she needed, but she had lost the comfort of her own illusions. As the Nevada dust faded behind them, Jax looked out at the sky he had once owned, his hand resting on Ava's shoulder, a silent guardian returning to a battlefield he had thought he had left forever. The glass towers of the city rose from the horizon like jagged shards of ice, reflecting the cold, gray light of a world that didn't care for desert dust. As the helicopter touched down on the private helipad of the Vance Aerospace Plaza, the transition was jarring. The silence of the Nevada plains was replaced by the deafening roar of urban life and the rhythmic clicking of cameras. Sloan stepped out first, her professional mask sliding back into place, though her eyes kept drifting back to the man climbing out behind her. Jax stepped onto the concrete, holding Ava's hand tightly. He was still wearing his grease-stained work shirt and heavy boots, a dark, weathered shadow in a world of polished chrome. The security detail at the helipad moved to intercept him, their hands on their holsters. "It is all right," Sloan barked, her voice echoing with the authority that had made her a titan. "He is with me, and he is the most important person in this building." They moved through the corridors of glass and steel, a surreal procession. Employees paused in their tracks, staring at the disheveled mechanic and the small girl walking alongside their iron-willed CEO. Sloan led them straight to the grand boardroom on the 80th floor, where the fate of the company was currently being dismantled by men in $3,000 suits. Inside, the atmosphere was funereal. 12 board members sat around a table made of petrified wood, listening to a presentation by a rival conglomerate's representative. The screens were filled with red graphs, data points of a failing engine project and a plummeting stock price. The Thorn-Vance engine is a relic, a man named Elias, the head of the rival firm, was saying with a smirk. It is over-engineered and impossible to stabilize. Without the original designer, you are just selling expensive scrap metal. Our offer for a total buyout stands until the end of this hour. The doors swung open with a violence that made the board members jump. Sloane marched in, her chin held high. The Thorn-Vance engine is not a relic, Elias. It is a masterpiece that you are too mediocre to understand. Sloane, enough, an elderly board member sighed. You're late, and you've brought guests? He looked at Jax with a mixture of confusion and disgust. This is a closed session. Please have this man escorted to the service elevator. This man, Sloane said, her voice dropping into a dangerous low frequency, is the only reason my helicopter didn't crash into the Sierra Nevadas 2 hours ago. And he is the only reason any of you still have a job. She turned to Jax, stepping aside to give him the floor. The board members leaned back, ready to laugh, ready to dismiss the grease monkey from the desert. Jax didn't look at the men. He didn't look at the luxury of the room. He walked straight to the main terminal and tapped a few keys with a speed that made the head IT technician gasp. The failing engine schematics appeared on the massive, wall-sized screen. Jax picked up a digital stylus, and for the next 5 minutes, the room went as silent as a tomb. He didn't speak in buzzwords. He spoke in physics. He slashed through lines of flawed code, redrawing the fuel injection paths and the thermal bypass he had just prototyped in the desert. His hands, still stained with oil, moved over the screen like a conductor's baton. The reason your project is failing, Jax began, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that commanded every ear, is because you tried to digitize a soul. You built a machine that thinks too much and breathes too little. You've let Elias here convince you that the thermal fracture is a hardware limit. It isn't. It is a mathematical error in your atmospheric compensation. He tapped a final button, and the red graphs on the screen suddenly turned a brilliant, steady green. The simulation of the engine reached a perfect equilibrium, the efficiency numbers climbing to heights the board had only dreamed of. That's impossible, Elias stammered, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. No one can stabilize the Mark 7 without a supercomputer. I didn't need a supercomputer, Jax said, turning to face the room, his eyes burning with the fire of a creator defending his child. I needed a copper wire and 10 minutes in the Nevada sun. My name is Jackson Thorne. I built the wings you're trying to sell, and I'm telling you now, the project isn't dead. Your vision is. The name hit the room like a physical shock. The board members sat frozen, their eyes darting between the legendary Ghost and the brilliant data on the screen. The buyout offer was forgotten. The laughter was dead. Sloane stepped forward, placing a hand on the back of Jax's chair. She looked at her board, her gaze fierce and unwavering. Jackson Thorne is returning as Chief Technical Officer, effective immediately. And he will be working from a new research facility, one far away from the corruption of this boardroom. If any of you have an objection, you can follow Elias out the door. One by one, the board members stood up. Not to protest, but to applaud. It was a standing ovation born of fear, respect, and the realization that they had just been saved by the man they would have ignored on the street. As the meeting dissolved into chaos, Elias tried to slink away, but Jax stepped in his path. He didn't use violence. He simply leaned in, the scent of the desert still clinging to him. Elias, Jax whispered, next time you try to steal a man's legacy, make sure he isn't still alive to take it back. Sloane watched him, her heart swelling with a pride she couldn't explain. She had brought him to the city to save her company. But as Jax turned to pick up Ava and walk out of the room, She realized she was the one who had been truly rescued. She had seen the truth behind the grease and the dust, and she knew she could never go back to the life she had lived before the desert. "Jax!" she called out as they reached the elevator. "You saved us. Everything. What do you want in return? Name your price." Jax paused, looking at his daughter, then at the woman who had dared to kiss him in a sandstorm. "I don't want your money, Sloan. I want the city to stop trying to kill the things I build. And maybe, I want to see if you can be as brave in the light as you were in the dust." Sloan smiled, a real, vulnerable smile that reached her eyes. "I think I can manage that." 6 months have passed since the glass towers of the city were shaken by the return of Jackson Thorne. But the city could not hold him for long. True to Sloane's promise, the corporate world had to adapt to the man, not the other way around. The high-stakes boardroom, once a place of cold calculations and predatory buyouts, had been forced to recognize that the soul of technology doesn't live in a skyscraper. It lives in the heart of the one who dreams it. The Nevada desert remains a world of gold and bone, but the lonely gas station has been transformed. It is no longer a graveyard for rusted parts. Now, it stands as the Thorne Vance Research Sanctuary, a sleek, low-profile facility of solar glass and reclaimed wood. It blends perfectly into the sagebrush. Here, the brightest young minds in the country come to learn, not just about aerodynamics, but about the ethics of creation. The sun is beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of crimson and violet. The heat of the day has softened into a gentle desert breeze. Jax is standing under a wide hangar door, his sleeves rolled up, his hands still comfortably stained with oil. He is working on a new prototype, a clean energy engine designed to heal the air rather than pollute it. Nearby, Ava is no longer playing alone in the dust. She has a small workbench of her own, where she is intently assembling a small solar-powered bird, her face a mirror of her father's focus. The sound of a car approaching breaks the silence. It isn't a luxury sedan or a military transport. It is a rugged, dust-covered SUV. Sloan steps out, but she is unrecognizable from the woman who first landed here. Gone are the gray power suits and the sharp defensive posture. She wears simple jeans and a linen shirt, her hair tied back, her skin glowing with a health that no city spa could provide. She walks toward the hangar, carrying 2 bottles of cold water. She pauses for a moment, watching Jax and Ava. A soft, genuine smile touches her lips, the kind of smile that only comes from someone who has finally found where they belong. "The board meeting ended early," Sloan says, handing a bottle to Jax. "They tried to argue about the budget for the new turbines, but I told them the chief technical officer was currently busy with a more important project, teaching his daughter how to make things fly." Jax takes the water, his eyes meeting hers with a warmth that has long since melted the ice between them. And did they listen? They didn't have a choice, Sloan laughs, leaning her back against the hangar wall. "I reminded them that the last time they doubted you, they almost lost everything. They are starting to realize that the most valuable asset we have isn't the patent. It is the man who refuses to sell his soul." She looks out at the vast, peaceful horizon. "Hóa ra thứ hỏng hóc nặng nhất không phải là chiếc trực thăng, mà là định kiến của em. Cảm ơn anh vì đã sửa nó bằng một nụ hôn." Jax pulls her close, his arms strong and steady around her shoulders. "It wasn't just the kiss, Sloan. It was the fact that you were willing to walk through the dust to find the truth." As the stars begin to flicker to life over the Nevada desert, the billionaire and the engineer stand together. They are no longer defined by their titles or their bank accounts. They are a family, anchored by the sand and the wind, building a future where technology serves humanity, and where every machine is built with love. The desert, once a place of hiding, has finally become a place of home. True worth is never found in the things we own, but in the people we are willing to protect and the integrity we refuse to lose. Jackson Sloan's story is a reminder that even the most broken things, whether an engine or a heart, can be fixed with a little humility and a lot of courage. If you believe that talent and love can change the world, please hit that subscribe button and share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for riding with us through the desert.